This time Odd is speaking with Antony Butcher. Antony is riding across America to raise money and awareness for multiple sclerosis, a disease that has affected his life via his mother. Antony's whole mission is to help others and provide funding, via pledges, to support others dealing with MS. Odd and Antony talk about the experiences and differences he's viewed as he has pedaled his way across the United States. Links are provided in the description below.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, we have been doing interviews with all different types of people, and Antony is doing something amazing. Antony is riding across America. Antony, thank you for joining me.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
As you guys notice, Antony has a bit of an accent. He's not from around here. Antony, where are you from?
So I am from Yorkshire in the United Kingdom. I am a fully fledged Brit, sneaking my way across America and having lots of wonderful conversations as people try and guess my accent. So far I've had Australian, Canadian and French, which I found a little bit strange, but someone just went, "You must be European, are you French?" I don't
Obviously,
know, maybe I thought French.
Never heard a French accent.
That's what I was thinking.
All right, so you're riding across America. Why?
So that question probably has three different answers, and I can give them all to you right now. The first question is I'm raising money for charity. My mum was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when I was a teenager, but she's probably had it since before I was born. So I've done a huge amount of fundraising for the MS Society. It's something that's very important to me. MS is one of those conditions that you can't stop happening. There's nothing you can do to help the person. And so for me, fundraising is a way of helping other people who are living with MS, but also trying to ensure that in the future there are people who don't go through what we have been through. The second reason is that in 2017, I was in San Francisco on holiday for a friend's wedding. And I was in a difficult work situation. No one's fault. I was working for this really great charity that was going to move from Europe to the UK and then didn't. So I ended up being the only person employed in the country, spent a lot of time working from home, being isolated. It's kind of like a trial run of COVID. And I did not cope well with that and ended up having a bit of a mental health breakdown. And it took me a bit of time to realize what that was and how I was coping with it. And when I was in San Francisco was when I realized I had to quit and start all over again. And so I was on this beach at Land's End on the far west side of San Francisco. And I said to myself, hey, I'm not feeling good now, but one of these days I'm going to be feeling better. And hey, when I am, I'm going to cycle back here. And if I'm going to cycle back here, well, I might as well start from the other side of the country. And if I'm going to start from the other side of the country, I might as well start from New York. And so that idea formed in my mind. And I told a few people, and then I went on Google Maps and I went, holy heck, what have I signed up for here? This is a big country. And what are these mountain ranges? And I'm sort of researching these and thinking, how high? But by that point, the idea was formed, and I'm a big fan of sometimes you have to think about things and come up with a plan, and sometimes you have to say, this feels right, I'm going to find a way to do it. And then the third reason is, heck, you've got an interesting country. There's a lot of America. I'm in my 15th state at the moment. I have seen all different sides of America. Everyone who I've met has treated me with courtesy, respect, and often overwhelming kindness. And I'm just loving
America.
Well, I tell you what I found, because I agree with you. And one of the things I was really interested in is kind of getting a chance to see behind the headlines of America. Because in the UK, we hear the headlines, probably much as you do for the UK. We see kind of what's going on at a big level. Maybe we get a couple of local interest stories. But I really wanted the chance to come and see America on the ground. And, you know, in my mind, it's almost like I'm living like a local, because as I go across America, I'm staying with people who offer to put me up for a night. And so I have been just treated as if I was a local. I've been taken to people's favorite restaurants. I've been taken to ball games. I've gone to Adventureland, a small theme park on the outskirts of Des Moines, Iowa. And hey, it's not Disneyland, but I absolutely loved it because that was the real America that tourists don't get to go to normally. And I think what I found, and you know, I'm going to preface this by saying, you know, if you're watching this video, I am a straight white man with a British accent. That probably helps. But what I found is you go in, and I've had conversations with people who have very different opinions with me, and I said, look, let's just have a conversation. You probably come from a different place, a different culture, a different society. I come from a different place, culture, and society, and I'm really intrigued to learn a little bit more about this. So I've had conversations about all manner of topics, the sort of things that British people are normally told, don't have this conversation with Americans. And not with the aim of saying I want to change your opinion, but I just want to hear your story. I want to find out why you feel like this, and I want to tell you my perspective on things, because often people haven't met someone who comes from another country who has a different point of view. I sat down with someone in Iowa who said they've never left they've never left Northern America. They've been to Mexico, been to Canada. They have why would I go anywhere else apart from America, they say. So I have a chance to kind of say, well, let me tell you my perspective coming from outside the country. And that's been interesting and fascinating.
I know the reason we got connected is a mutual friend of ours, a guy named Chris. And I met Chris through a video game. And he messaged me. He's like, "Odd, I know you know people all over your country. You know, my friend Anthony is doing this. You know, here's where he's going to be. Do you know anybody that might be willing to put him up?" And unfortunately, you're on the side of the country that I don't have a lot of connections on. But he brought up the idea of doing an interview with you. He told me. I had told you this in our pre-interview chat the other day. The whole point of what I do is stories. And getting people's stories are important to me. It seems like it's something that's important to you as well. So the fact that you're riding across America, I mean, I've only done it in the car. I can't imagine what it's like on a bicycle.
And you know what? I can't imagine either. I think I wake up some days and it's really difficult for me to say, hey, I'm cycling across America right now. I think, what I wake up each day and say, right, where am I cycling to today? And normally my body goes, sorry, what? We're cycling again? We've done that for like 2 months. Surely today's a day that we go to the jacuzzi, we go to the spa, we have a five-star, 5-course meal. I'm like, no, we've got a mountain to climb up today, body. And my body's like, why are you doing this to us? So it is very much a day at a time. But like you say, I've met some incredible people. I've had a chance to share my story, but I've also had a chance to hear other people's stories, funny, entertaining, challenging, sad, and in a whole range of different situations, from sitting over an Olive Garden meal to going on a late night drive down a river outside Toledo, to lying on the massage table of a stranger who I met 20 minutes earlier in a car park in Detroit, whilst he has a massage gun having a go at my hamstrings, discussing critical race theory. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride.
See, I wish Chris would have gotten a hold of me sooner. If you were in Detroit, I'm 30 minutes outside of Detroit.
Oh, now let me tell you, Detroit has been one of the highlights of my trip. And actually, if you look at the map of America, Detroit is not on a straight line across America. I specifically, when I knew I was going to Chicago, I was like, well, of course I'm going to go to Detroit. Yeah, I'm going to have to cycle an extra couple of days to get there. But for me, it's a symbol of kind of this, America growing as a big industrial country and then going, well, hold on, this isn't working properly. And then this city kind of being left to rediscover itself. And yeah, I absolutely love Detroit. One of my favorite places so far.
Yeah, I grew up here. I've traveled the country a little bit. I've lived in a couple of different states, but I found my way back here. I have family and friends that I missed and whatnot. It's got its problems like everywhere else. But I have to say that the culture, the architecture, the people, it's all just, it's unlike anything you're going to see anywhere else.
Yeah, and I mean, I completely agree with that. And I was staying up in Royal Oaks and Ferndale, and had really interesting conversations, both about kind of what's been happening now, and some interesting conversations about how the irony of Detroit is that the arrival of the interstates is kind of what heralded the end of the motor age, because it led to this white flight, and then the city kind of declined, and then you have a post-industrial decline as well. And there's this great irony that the motor city is almost destroyed by the motor car. And what I loved going through Detroit is in many places they're kind of throwing up these cycle lanes. And in places like Ferndale, I saw kids cycling, young couples, retired people, and kind of the city's almost going, well, actually, hold on, maybe if we, allow people to live in the city as human beings and not live in a box driving from one place to the other, we'll get these communities that kind of is what we sorely need. But I think picking up on what you said, everywhere I've been, I think would use the same way to describe itself.
Yeah. Well, that's
and I think, thinking of America, like as a UK person, I often think of a very homogenous country. This is the United. It's the first word in the name of your country, the United States of America. And actually, every state I went to, I was sat in York, Nebraska, in the middle of a thunderstorm with a British person who I'd met with because a British store in Omaha, Nebraska had put a photo up of me visiting them. And they welcomed me into this home while this thunderstorm went over. And his daughter was saying, hey, in Nebraska, and they gave me a Nebraska t-shirt, we hate Iowa. And I was like, but you're the same country. And, I've sat at the old end of the Union Pacific line in Julesburg, Nebraska, where they're telling me that 100 years ago they had a murder every day, and it was the Wild West. Mark Twain called it the wickedest city in the West. I've sat in, on the Kalamazoo River with someone telling me, hey, this is Albion, Kalamazoo. This is Michigan, and Michigan has the second highest rate of people staying in the state than anywhere else in the country because it almost has free borders with the two lakes and the top. And it's been really fascinating for me to get that chance to kind of glimpse under the bonnet, have a little look, where's the carburetor, where's the head gasket, and kind of see how this country works in reality. And it's fascinating.
What's weird too with Michigan specifically, we're a bit of a weird state because when you're in the lower part, and I'm going to use the map that all of us use here in Michigan. When you're in the lower part here, it's very much more like city and suburban and industrial in a way. And the further north you get, it starts to look more like what you've probably experienced in the more rural areas of America.
Yeah.
And then you go even further. Like, I know you didn't get up there, but I highly recommend that if you ever get the chance, go up into the UP. It is some of the most beautiful country, beautiful land you will ever see because there's like nobody there. There's a few, cities and stuff up there, but for the most part, like the industry hasn't gone up there. They haven't like ripped out all the trees or anything like that. It's just beautiful and forested and peaceful.
Yeah. And I had a whole load of people there, almost everyone who I spoke to in Michigan was saying, hey, we go up UP for our holidays. And it was kind of fascinating to me that you can have this little microcosm of America where people in Michigan often go on holiday in that part of Michigan. Right now I'm in Fort Collins, Colorado, where everyone heads up into the mountains when it's hot. A couple of days ago, it's hitting nearly 100 degrees if we're talking American. If there's any Brits out there, we're on, high 30s. That's how my brain kind of still perceives of it. And we drive up to the reservoir and everyone's out there paddle boarding and, all of the car parks are full. And kind of, I think a lot of people kind of look at their part of the country because the country's too big to get your head around. It's literally taken me 2 months to get a chunk of way across, and I'm still in a place where if I spill water on the ground, it's going to end up in the same ocean that I could see when I landed here. It's unfathomable the size of your country, but like you say, it's also a beautiful country, and I've seen some wonderful, wonderful things.
We got one state, Texas. I don't know if you've been through it or not, but I'm going to recommend that if you cycle through Texas, you go through the top part of Texas and not the middle part. Because in a car, it takes 2 days to get through one state.
Yeah. And this is bizarre to me because I come from a country, if people say, where do you come from in the UK? And I say, well, I come from a place near Leeds. And like, oh, how far is that from London? Which is often, the one city that, lots of Americans are all heard of London. I go, well, it's maybe 3 hours away if I take the train, maybe 3.5 if I give myself a generous change. And they're like, oh, wow. And how far is Edinburgh? I go, oh, 3.5 hours. And I remember having a conversation with someone kind of just as I was leaving DC and heading towards the Midwest, and we were talking about the size of the country. And they were saying, he grew up here kind of, he would travel 2 days by car to get to Boston. And then one time they did a road trip to the West Coast. And that's kind of, back 30, 40, 50 years ago, that's, nearly a week's driving to get across there. He said he remembered the first time that he went to the UK and he looked at the map and he went, is this it? Where's the rest of it? This was the country that, you know, ruled or subdued, you know, almost half of the world's landmass. And it's absolutely tiny. And we, you know, I can fit 4 United Kingdoms across my route.
I know I've got a sister-in-law that lives over in Germany. Her husband is stationed there. And when my wife and her talk, she's like, yeah, we're going on a day trip to Paris, or we're going on a day trip here. And I'm like, as my American brain is trying to fathom, like, as you said, you know, the United States is unfathomably large. My brain is like thinking, okay, you're in Germany. Paris seems so far away. And they're like, no, it's a day trip. And you're like, what?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I can do Paris as a day trip. If I got up early enough, I could go and have lunch in Paris and be home the same day.
It's wild, you know, when you don't get outside your bubble, and in this case, the bubble would be the country. You really have no idea about anything, really. Like, you know, when it comes to there's a lot of sentiment here in America that, you know, America's the greatest, and, you know, there's no point in going anywhere else. And I think that's a very narrow-minded mindset, because there are experiences and things that you can see outside of our country's borders that you can't experience or see within our borders. And I think it makes you a more well-rounded and a richer person, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I've had a lot of conversations. You know, I'm British. I come to this country with preconceptions, and I've tried to come open-minded and say I'm willing for those to be challenged. And a lot of those, every time I've brought them up, when I talk about things like the rights that I have as a worker in the UK, the amount of holiday I get, maternity leave, how the NHS works, sick pay, and people are there going, what? And I think what I find really interesting, and I kind of say this with a huge degree of fondness, I really love my time here. I love speaking to people. The continent is so big that it's kind of, you know, it's almost kind of self-enclosed. You know, Europe is so small that, like, of course I can travel to France. Of course I can travel to Germany. Of course I can take a ferry to the Netherlands. Of course I can go on honeymoon to Italy and kind of be there in half a day. Whereas for Americans, and we often joke in the UK and the EU, if we see Americans in Europe, we're like, well, where else have you been? Because they come over and they do a tour of the whole continent. And actually now that makes sense to me a bit more, because I'm like, well, if I come to America, I say, well, I'm going to stay here for 2 weeks and see as much as possible, and you guys can't just fly over. But I think one of the things that I have noticed is that the way your country is set up is often, and I wonder if it's partly because it's a young country, reinforces that notion. So, for example, things like the Pledge of Allegiance at school. I don't know any other countries that do that. The amount of United States flags I've seen. Now, I will say this. When I started coming over, when I was first here, I was like, my God, all these flags. And now my thought is, hey, that flag looks really good. When you get a nice breeze, your flag is beautiful, whispering in the wind. But it's everywhere. And there's this notion that I think is kind of represented by that kind of, well, we are America and we're the best country in the world. And I've heard people say that, and you go to a baseball game, and I went with a British friend in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and it's like, quick, stand up, take your hat off, look respectful. And I'm like, sure. I mean, this is literally a song about how the Americans defeated the British in Baltimore. So maybe I'll quietly sing God Save the Queen under my voice and hope no one hears me. But I think it's a country that kind of almost lives this myth of, well, of course we're America. We are the bastion of freedom. We are the best country in the world. And as someone who comes from another country that has freedom, I says, well, what freedoms do you have that I don't have? What makes America a better country? And I love it. And there are some wonderful things about the country, but I've had conversations with people where I've gone, you would really benefit from stepping outside of that mindset and going on a visit to Europe, spending a couple of weeks, spending a couple of months there. But the challenge is, I say that as someone who's been through that experience. And I think if you live in America and you grow up, say, in the Midwest or the West or on the East Coast or wherever, and that's all you know, there's not necessarily someone who's taking you that step back and saying, hey, why don't you go and try something else?
Well, I mean, personally, the way I feel is America has been sold a beautiful lie to cover up the uncomfortable nightmare that it really is. Yeah, there's a lot of good here, but there's also a lot of bad. And like you said, when you look at workers' rights and the amount of holidays or holiday that you guys get, things like that. There's a lot of improvement that America needs. But the weird thing is, those people that are claiming, that have those pretty flags waving, that are claiming that America is the greatest and that nowhere else is as good as we are, most of the time those people haven't even left their damn city. You know, they've never been outside their small rural community. You know, they don't leave. My wife grew up in an area in Kentucky where the majority of people don't ever leave the county that they grew up in. They never see outside of this small microcosm. And of course, the lie is easier to maintain at that point because you don't have a frame of reference. America does make it difficult to travel at times. You know, we have a lot of restrictions and stuff, even in the past. You know, and one of the things, like I'm a huge proponent for fighting the indoctrination that seems to be being shoved down our throats at this point. One of the big things for me is, you know, why do we need to indoctrinate ourselves? Why do we need to believe that we're the greatest there is? What's wrong with understanding that, you know, other countries or, you know, other cultures are just as valid and just as good? You know, I am not your typical American. I have a lot of problems with the way things are run, and I'm very vocal about it. And I think maybe that's the thing, is we're allowed, or at least we've been bred to believe we're the only ones that are allowed to criticize our government. But I even know that's not true necessarily.
Yeah, and it's one of the things I'm finding really interesting about this journey. You know, the bottom line is I've probably spent a lot more time with people who think like I do than with other people. But I've met a load of people and been able to have conversations where I said, well, what's it like in Europe? And I've said some, you know, talked a bit about it, and they've gone, I hadn't realized it was like that. And I think back, you know, I was in San Francisco in 2017 on this holiday and in a difficult place. And when we go on holiday, my wife and I like to look at where all the tourists are going and go to a different place, because I don't like to go to a place that's just catering for tourists. Sure, it's spectacular, but often you go one valley over, the view's just as nice and there's no one there. So we went up to Northern California, and we went to a small Mexican restaurant in a place called Checo. I'm not quite sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Only customers that evening. They were about to close, and we came in and said, well, hey, sure, come on in. And we got sat down chatting with the owner, and we made a comment about a problem we'd have with the NHS. And he went, oh, yeah, I've heard all about the NHS and how bad that is. And my wife and I went, what? And so we got talking, and we talked a bit about the NHS, and he talked a bit about his healthcare. And he was saying, oh, yeah, no, I've got this really good medical insurance, which means now that we're on our third child, our deductible's a lot lower. And I went, what's a deductible? And he went, oh, you know, for money that you pay when you go and have a child. And I went, why would you pay money to have a child? And he was like, you don't do that? I was like, no. And we got chatting, and we started talking. You know, I'm a big fan of being open and having these conversations in kind of a very open and friendly way. And we worked out that the amount of tax that I pay in the UK was the same as the medical insurance he was paying, just the medical insurance, just before deductibles. And I was saying, look, you know, there's a whole load of problems with the NHS. We have a government who has underfunded it for 10 years. We have staff who are at a breaking point. But you have a heart attack, you get taken straight to where you're going, you get sorted. The only time that money might change hands is, you know, if you're from a low-income background and someone's visited you or you've had to park, you might be able to go and get your parking money back. It's all free of charge, and you walk out. And I hear stories when I was in New York of someone saying, oh, yeah, no, I've got a friend who was a waiter who was feeling faint and fainted, and someone called an ambulance. And he said, no, don't call an ambulance. I won't be able to afford an ambulance. I can't afford this. And the ambulance comes, and he's fighting off the court care, saying, please, someone just drive me to hospital. This isn't covered. And I'm there thinking, I find it difficult to reconcile the claim we are the greatest country in the world with the idea that you have the largest population of people who have gone bankrupt because of medical bills. That does not strike me as a hallmark.
So I used to work health insurance, call center side of it, dealing with people who were trying to get claims covered and having to understand how health insurance works. And it just pissed me off. Like, I've never been so angry to go to work every day because you have to tell these people oh, well, yeah, this should be covered, but you fell into this thing called the donut hole. And they're like, what the fuck is a donut hole? And like, oh, well, that's the point where you're no longer actually covered. Like, we're not paying for anything. You haven't paid in enough at this point. Your coverage, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, that makes no sense. And I'm sitting there thinking, I can't disagree with you, because there's the deductible that you have to pay in, and then the insurance kicks over, and then they pay up to a certain portion, and then you fall into the donut hole. And the donut hole usually is like thousands upon thousands of dollars you have to pay to get out of it before they start covering everything again. And then you only have their year from like policy start to policy end and rollover, and it's infuriating to understand that we work and we work and we work and we barely make anything, and the one simple thing that we as Americans collectively need, hell, it's written right there in our friggin' Constitution, and the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, I can't have life and pursue happiness if my body's falling apart.
Yeah.
So, anyways,
and this is one of the. I was just going to throw in really quickly. One of the things I've loved in the conversations, and one of the things I have enjoyed, is I think America is a country which is increasingly, from my perception, but I'm young, I'm sure other people would say differently, I think there are less conversations. People, if you're a certain type of people, you speak to other types of people who believe the same thing, you reinforce your views. And that's not, I'm not blaming any one person, one party. It's the same in the UK. I think increasingly we don't talk to people from different places.
Call that, and I think echo chamber.
Yeah, and then when you look at the surveys, let's go back to Obamacare and their surveys, and people ask, do you believe that everyone should have access to the healthcare they need? Yes. Do you believe people should go bankrupt? No. And the people asked all the questions that kind of said, oh, well, Obamacare does, and they almost universally, everyone went, yeah, these policies sound good. And then people say, well, what do you think of Obamacare? Well, I don't like it because it's got the Obama name on it. And I think, on so many issues, gun reform, healthcare, education, infrastructure, the vast majority of the American public, repeatedly in opinion polls, are in a similar place, more progressive than where American politics is right now. They want to see these changes, but the political system in America has almost been hijacked by a group of people who have more extreme views. And I hope that this is something that's okay for me to say as a Brit, but like the opinion polls say, people want reform of these things, and it's not happening. And my opinion is the only way to bridge that gap is to have more conversations, and for people to reach out and chat with people who they wouldn't normally chat with, and just say, let's just have this open conversation, and I'll share my view and my experiences and you share yours, because then you might find that people start realizing that on both sides of the aisle there is common ground.
Well, the thing that I like to point out is because we're leading up to an election year. It's 2022. Next year is when the political machine will really start getting rolling, and then 2024 we've got another presidential election. And what you see is there's two factions here in America. There's the left and the right. There's two political parties. That's all that exists. And the left thinks the right is full of shit, and the right thinks the left is full of shit. And I am constantly in comment sections and espousing on my own shows, like, it doesn't matter. Left wing, right wing, it's all part of the same diseased bird. Yeah. Our problem is the politicians themselves are bought and paid for by the corporations in America. And if it doesn't make dollars and cents, it doesn't make sense for them to do. And that is where we find ourselves in a lot of our cases. That is why our education system is crumbling. That is why our healthcare system is crumbling. That is why our infrastructure is crumbling. That is why every main thing that you will hear Americans say that they want reform on is crumbling, is because it doesn't make dollars and cents to the corporations that are in control of everything.
Yeah. In my view, the only way out of this is going to be more conversations, more people realizing, I think, the way that politics has become more and more commercial, and those conversations being not just between everyone, but between politicians. The idea now, and I see it, you've got the public inquisition going on about January 6th. Politics seems to very much be, if I'm on this side of the line, I don't care about what you think. I'm just going to vote with this side. And for me, politics, now my foray into politics was local politics and a student union. And my approach was, well, let's have a chat about the issue, find out what the problem is, and try and find some common ground to solve it. And
Holy
it kind of
shit,
feels
the
like everyone's
logical
just said,
approach.
yeah, people have just said, hey, the common ground, we can't do that because then we might lose an election because we'll be told that we're kind of, traitors. And I'm like, well, actually, if that's how you take your politics, there is only one end game to that politics. If you increasingly say we're not going to speak to people who don't believe in the same things as we do, you are going to find yourself going further and further down a rabbit hole where people will become more and more entrenched in their views. We have seen that happen around the world. We saw that happen in America. I don't think that we want to get to a stage where people are so entrenched in their views that there is a military solution. I think that now's the time, and I'm a big believer in saying, hey, I'm going to step off my side. I'm going to put, I have a whole load of strong views. I could talk for hours about, my views on motor cars and why we should make our cities much more walking and cycling friendly. But if I come in and say, here's what I believe, we're never going to have a conversation. So I have to come in and say, hey, I want to hear your point of view. I want to hear what your problems are that you face. And I think if everyone starts doing that and says, hey, we've got some common ground here, maybe there's going to be the opportunity for America to take a couple of steps in a more sensible direction. But that's just a view of a Brit, and we gave up our claim to America about 300 years ago.
You guys can have it back, I think. No, I will say this, one of the more entertaining things to do, for me anyways, is like, I like to watch American politics. We've got C-SPAN and all that, where you can watch what's going on the floor. But then I love to watch the video feed from Parliament as well. And at least Parliament, for you guys, seems more entertaining.
Well, it does, but there's a problem with that. Parliament in the UK was burnt down by bombs in World War II, and when it's being rebuilt, a lot of parliaments around the world at that time were saying, hey, maybe the idea of having two factions on the other side of a hall having a debate isn't the best way, and maybe we should have a more circular chamber where everyone can have a discussion and agree things. And Winston Churchill was a big fan of the theatricality of Parliament. And you're right, it's great fun to watch. But I wonder whether the way to govern the country is for people who hold different views to shout at each other across the room and for nothing to happen. In my view, I kind of quite like the way it's done in a lot of European countries, where they say, actually, we're going to get a whole load of people. We're going to have a voting system which is more fair so that your vote will actually count. And we're going to get a group of people in a room and sit them in a circle and say, how can we make life better? And what are the solutions? And I think as soon as you start stepping away from pragmatic politics, you start getting to a stage where nothing happens. And we have this ridiculous, even in the UK, we have prime ministers and politicians who are standing up. Hey, I'm really interested in the rail industry, and we could talk about public transport for hours, but we can't, because I have breakfast to have and all sorts of exciting things. But in the UK, we have a rail minister who's standing up and promising a revolution in rail travel. Is going to be significant investment, significant improvements. At the same time as he's gone to all of the rail industries and said, hey, we're not going to give you any of the money that you lost during COVID. Good luck finding a way to make it work. And so the rail industry says, okay, well, if you're not going to give us, the luck of income that we had, like you've given almost every other industry, the only thing we can do is run less trains and potentially look at not doing investment and potentially look at closing some lines. And the government goes, why is the rail industry doing this? And you're like, what? You can't claim umbrage there. Yeah. So we have all over kind of politicians who are doing it for the show. And I believe there are lots of good politicians in there, but the ones that we hear about are the ones who speak loudest, rather than the group of people saying, hey, we've got a real problem. We lost some income during COVID, but hey, we know that investment in rail gets people out of cars, has benefits for health, supports other people who need to drive because there's less cars on the road. Maybe we should find a way to keep this industry going and to improve it.
Yeah, the analogy I like to use a lot is you're told that the fire is hot, and then you get indignant when it burned you because you touched it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, I can't help you at that point. Like you were told, well, I needed to find out for myself. Well, what did we learn? I learned that fire needs to be banned. Oh my God, no, no. All right, so
ban fire. That's the placard.
Yeah. So you had said that your mom had MS. What was it? What's it been like for her? And obviously it was a struggle enough to get you on a bicycle riding through our country.
So my mum has a progressive type of multiple sclerosis. So some people have a relapsing remitting, where it's kind of you're unwell for a while and then you're better, but not quite as better, and then you're a bit more unwell and then you're better, but not quite as better. My mum's just been on a slow downhill. climb. So my mum, the last time my mum walked was about 2013. She uses a wheelchair to get around now. Lived in residential care since 2012, 13. Lived in a nursing home since 2019. And I'm an only child, so I kind of provide a lot of that kind of emotional care, but there are carers who kind of look after her every day. And, it's been difficult preparing for this ride and saying, hey, I'm going to see you in 3 months, look after yourself. But I think what's fascinated me about this ride is when you take a step back off the treadmill of life. We all live this world where we're told, go to school, go to college, get a job, get a house, get a mortgage, get a family, get a car, retire, enjoy yourself for 5 years, be old. And I've had this opportunity because of this mental health breakdown, because I want to raise money for charity, to say I'm going to just press pause for 3 months. And I'm real lucky. I've come from a background where I've got a little bit of money, so I can do that. I'm not rich, but I've got a bit of money. I actually had a grandmother who passed away in 2020 during COVID and received just about enough money that kind of basically covers my wages for 3 months to allow me to do this. But that gives me a chance, I think, to step outside of hey, what email should I respond to next? And kind of, cycle across the country and have a whole load of conversations and reflect on kind of what is important in life. Because one of the things I think I've learned with my mum being unwell is just how precious that time is, because you never know where you're going to wake up in the morning and find out that someone you love isn't here, or find out that you've got something that's going to stop you doing the things that you love, or that your company you work for is gone. You never know when that prosperity and that happiness is going to be taken away from you. And for me, having grown up in this world where I had this huge challenge, and it's taken me 15 years of processing, and I'm still getting my head around how this has impacted me growing up with a mum who was unwell, has given me an opportunity to say, well, actually, I don't want to just live on this treadmill and just say, hey, I'm going to let what happens. I want to go out and grab life by the horns and get every jot of excitement and fun and conversation and passion and beauty that I can from my time on this planet. And I'm a big believer in the idea that sometimes the best things that can happen to us can come from the most horrible things. Sometimes it's from crises that we can have a big realizations about what we want from our time on this planet. I work at a university of students, and I'm always saying to students, what do you want to do when you graduate? And I'm just waiting for the answer, which I want someone to give me one day. And I get people say, I want to be a teacher, I want to go off and be a lawyer, I want to do this, I want to do that. And I just want someone to come to me and say, I want to be happy. Because to me, that's my answer. What do I want? I want to be happy. I've don't know how many years I'm going to get on this planet. I want to be happy for as many as possible. I want to make the world a little bit better than it was when I first got here, whether that's raising money for charity or campaigning for safe cycling infrastructure for kids in my hometown, or, caring for people and speaking to other people who are challenging with mental health and helping them realize what's going on. But ultimately, I want to be happy. And I think so much of what we do day to day doesn't always bring us that happiness. We're often kind of chasing a job, chasing money, chasing that car, chasing that holiday, and not kind of taking that step back and saying, I'm just happy with what I've got. And that for me came from seeing my mum's health be stolen, my mum's independence, my mum's mobility be stolen, and kind of going, well, I never know when that's going to happen. So I want to know when I'm in that place. I'm never going to sit there and say, here I am lying in my bed at 80 years old, but at least I worked till 6 o'clock on that Tuesday in 2017 and got that email sent. I'm going to think back and think about the quality of relationships, even the people who I've met on this trip, who I'm making friends with and keeping in touch with. That's what's important to me.
So, I like that answer, though. I want to be happy. I think you're right. I think more people, we live for, like you said, we live for that vacation. We live for the weekend. We don't spend enough time in the here and now. We're either worried about what's going to happen tomorrow or what happened yesterday.
Yeah.
And it's refreshing to hear someone else say that, because a lot of the times I find myself feeling like an alien, not only in my own country, but sometimes on this planet, because my mindset doesn't match everything else that I've seen. My mindset doesn't seem to be a popular one.
Yeah. And I think if I could make a recommendation, there's a book by someone called Edith Eger. And the book is called The Choice. And Edith Eger is a survivor of Auschwitz. and writes a book when she's over 90 years old about her life. And I won't say too much about it, except to say that post leaving Auschwitz, she had a very difficult time. She started a family. She actually came to America. She still lives in America. And after her children were growing up, she thought, well, what do I do now? And she said, well, maybe I want to go to college because I didn't get the chance when I was a kid. And she gets interested in psychology, and she's thinking about going off to do a clinical doctorate to become a psychologist. And she goes, well, or psychiatrist. And she says, well, and says to her teacher, well, if I do that, I'll be 50 by the time I graduate. And the teacher says, you're going to be 50 anyway. So she goes off and does that and becomes a psychiatrist. And she has this book that kind of has 3 threads. It talks about her experiences of Auschwitz and kind of the day-to-day, what that was like and how she survived, which is pure choice and pure chance. She talks about some of the patients she's seen and some of the lessons she's learned, but she also then analyzes her experiences from a kind of psychiatric point of view and kind of comes up with the idea that we all have a choice about how we react to traumatic or difficult situations. Everyone will face trauma and difficult situations. Death is a natural part of life. For every good day, there will be a bad day. And we're not always in a place where we have this choice, but there comes a time where we can choose to be imprisoned by the trauma that we've experienced and live the sort of life where we would say, well, I can't do that because this is what's going on, or have I told you about this time? Or we can say, actually, this was terrible, but I'm going to honor that experience by living the best life I can. And if there's one anecdote I can share, she meets 2 Vietnam War veterans who are both double amputees, both sexually impotent as a result of an explosion. And the first one's there banging on the door and throwing his stuff everywhere, and he's fucking, and he's, what the fuck has happened to me? And he's swearing. And she goes, well, at least he's being honest about his experience. But he's there going, I'm trapped in this body now. I can't do anything. This is so frustrating. My life has been stolen from me. And she goes next door to see someone who has exactly the same injuries. And he sat there and he's smiling and he's writing a letter. And she says, well, you just had this horrible thing. What happened? And he says, listen, lady, this bomb went off and I thought that's the end of my life. I've had my time on this earth. And here I am back in America. I've got my wife who's brought me some food from my favorite restaurant. And sure, I can't have kids, but I've got friends who've got kids that I can spend time with. I thought my life was over. And now I have an opportunity to, to almost start afresh. And I have this gift of a life that I didn't think I was going to have. And I think often for me, that's helped me understand what's happened with Mum. Hey, what happened to me was horrible, and it's still horrible. And I still, I'm bitter about the fact that I never got to dance with my mum at her wedding day. But actually for me, I turn around and say, well, maybe I can do some fundraising and help someone else in the same situation dance with their mum on their wedding day. And that is a gift that I've been given. It's horrible what happened, but if it hadn't have happened, I wouldn't be on the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. I wouldn't have seen the handover of a Pony Express during their annual reinvention. I wouldn't have been in Chicago to read chapter 36 of book 6 of Harry Potter to 2 kids and tell them that Dumbledore was dead. I've had all sorts of amazing experiences on this journey that only happened because of a pain I've experienced. And I think sometimes we just have to accept that and realize that we have an opportunity to still make good things even when it feels difficult.
I want to talk about mental health for a little bit. If you're comfortable talking about
absolutely
your experience. I used to work in a mental health hospital in Tucson, and one of the things that I would have to do is, like, my job was to kind of use my life experiences to try to help guide others that were in crises, either out of crises or help them feel that they're not alone. And one of the things that I learned and that I shared often is we're fighting against biology in a way. Our brains are hardwired to remember the bad stuff because we learn from the bad stuff. We learn from the failures. And so it seems like our lives are filled with nothing but bad moments because that's what our brain is hardwired to remember. I would ask people, you could probably tell me right offhand 10 bad things that have happened to you. And, they were like, yeah. And I was like, okay, tell me 5 good ones. And the 10 would be boom, 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 boom. And those 5 ones would be like, boom, boom. It would take longer to remember the good ones. And, it's just funny. Like I said, we're fighting biology in a way, but at the same time, we need to because otherwise we will wind up in a situation much like what we're in, is where we look around every day and all we see is bad. We don't see the good. We don't take time to cherish the little things, like reading a story, reading, what was it, chapter 36 or whatnot of the sixth Harry Potter book. You know, it's those little things. Those are our happiness moments. Those are the ones that we need to hold on to. I gotta ask, you said you went through a bit of a mental breakdown. What happened?
Sure, and I'm very happy to talk about this. And I'll just, for actually part of it's right, it's about raising money for MS, but it's also about raising awareness of mental health. And this is a story I've shared with over 1,000 people back home, schools, colleges, community groups, workplaces. So I started this fantastic job working for a human rights charity, brilliant charity, still have a lot of respect for them. I just found myself planning on moving to the UK. I ended up not moving to the UK, and I was appointed before that move happened. And I felt I could cope with that. I started working from home. And there wasn't a lot of work to do. I was meant to be doing fundraising. We kind of stepped back from that a bit because we weren't going to be in the UK as much. And so I found myself kind of sitting at my computer, waiting for stuff to come in. I was passionate about the work they were doing. I was being paid more than almost anyone else in the charity because I was on the UK pay scale and they were off in Eastern Europe. I started feeling a bit guilty about that, but I couldn't step away from the computer because, I was on work time. What if someone needed me? And started getting a bit fidgety and started getting a bit of an upset stomach. And so had a chat with my wife, and my wife, who's also had mental health challenges and was just unbelievably incredible and supportive, was like, hey, why don't I go and have a chat with a doctor? So I go to the doctor. I'm like, yeah, I just need some strong antacids or something because I'm getting this upset stomach. And she goes, no, you don't. You've got depression with anxiety, and we should talk about treatment options, including antidepressants. And I'm like, what? No, I'm a rock. I'm a man. I've helped other people. This is what I've been told as society. I should be able to cope with this. The idea that I can't cope with a bad work situation is laughable. But it was true, and things got worse. And I kind of was sharing what was going on, but kind of got to a stage where I wasn't leaving the house much. I was working from home 4 days a week, just sitting at my computer, finding myself kind of a bit kind of teary at times, not really sure what was going on. And then we went on holiday to San Francisco, and we went down to Santa Cruz for his friend's wedding. And it was whilst I was there, and sometimes when you're on holiday, you get that kind of feeling of, man, I could stay here forever. Why would I go back? I could just lounge on this beach. I could look at this view forever. And I had the extreme version of that. Whenever I thought of going back to the UK, going back to my job, I'd get this rush of adrenaline from my body. My skin would start prickling. I'd suddenly be awake. I'd start sweating. I couldn't sleep at night. And I just realized I've got to get out of it, and I've got to leave. And so I came back to the UK and handed in my notice and thought, there we go. Problem's gone. Problem solved. I'm going to leave the job and everything's going to be fine. And this is a point where I realized I was going to do a bike ride, and it was very much, this is going to be part of rebuilding my life. And last day of my job came, and we went for a walk in the hills of the Pennines, which is the sort of hill chain that runs down the middle of a country. Beautiful place, nice lunch. But it was a day that went really badly for me. And it started with rain, because it wasn't meant to be raining. I checked the weather forecast, maybe a tiny bit of drizzle, but it wasn't meant to rain. But it rained, and it rained heavily. And my wife and I were going for this walk, and we're walking up this hill, and we don't have umbrellas, we don't have coats. And I start blaming myself for the fact it's raining. I should have prepared for this. I should have brought an umbrella. I should have said, maybe we'll do something inside. And I started blaming myself for the fact that my wife was needing to look after me, and blaming myself for the fact I was unemployed. And I got to the point where I blamed myself for Brexit. If I had done more, I could have persuaded 300,000 people to vote in a different direction. And what was happening is I was spiraling and losing control of my thoughts, and I couldn't control that. And twice during that day, I had the thought and the opportunity of, hey, life would be easier if I just ended it. I can't escape this. And hey, I'm here talking to you right now in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. So this is a story that ends happily, but it was a long journey. It was 6 months that I found myself getting more and more depressed, and to the point where I had this thought of taking my life. And it took me a good 6 months to come back from that. It's not something, it's a bit like when you break your leg, you don't start running the next day. You have to it's a slow progress. And I had different forms of therapy, and some of them were helpful and some of them weren't. And started kind of working again. I got the job that I got now. And actually, when we finish speaking, I'm going to have a chat with my manager, who was the person who offered me my first full-time job after I finished that. And I remember going to that job interview, and when you get to the end of the interview and they say, have you got any questions for us? And you're meant to say something like, yeah, when can I start? Or let's talk about the salary you're going to offer me. And I went, yeah, I've just had a mental health breakdown due to a bad work situation caused by not having structure and format in my work and being very isolated. Why should I come and work for you? And I had 3 job interviews in 2 days, and I got 3 job offers because each and every one of them told me why I should come and work there. And each and every one of them in the job offer said, look, we want people who are going to be self-aware, because everyone, and I've talked about mental health for years, I can count on one hand the number of people who I've talked to who have said, I don't have mental health problems. This is something that is universal, but it's something that we don't always talk about. And I think especially for young men, and that's why we know research shows that incidences of things like anxiety, depression are far more common amongst people who are women or who identify as women. And let's not get into the whole debate around gender and gender identity, because gender is a construct. But if we just look at it sort of simply, people who are women who identify as women are far more likely to go and talk to their friends and say, I'm struggling. And people who are male or identify as male are far more likely just to keep it all in and think they can deal with it. And that is why, despite having a less common instance of mental health, we are far more likely to find ourselves taking our own lives. Because mental health is something which is not easy to cure, but talking about it and saying, I'm not okay and I need help, has to be that first part of getting out of this. And that's a message I'm really passionate about, and I've shared with a lot of people. And I try and use my own experiences as an example of saying, I'm standing in front of you telling you what went wrong, because I want to give you permission to ask for that help the next time you need help. Because we're social creatures. We follow examples. If we see more people talking about this, and I love hearing other people talk about mental health. You know, a lot of people take the mick out of the royal family in the UK for talking about the mental health. Look at the wonderful life you've had. Doesn't matter how much money you have. Doesn't matter how much privilege you have. It matters if you don't have money or privilege, because you'll have more barriers that will create more challenges. Anyone can experience loss. Anyone can experience trauma. Anyone can experience mental health. And it's, you know, I go back to that book by Edith Eger, The Choice. I feel almost honored that I've had a series of life situations that have given me the ability to stand up and say, hey, this is what happened to me. And if you're struggling, it's okay to ask for help. And
I agree.
Yeah.
As someone who has attempted suicide 7 times in his life, finally, the 7th time was the lucky time. I finally got it through my head.
Yeah.
It was, you know, like you said, I am a progressive heterosexual white male, but I still unfortunately have a lot of the archaic male belief structure still, and you know, I'm supposed to be able to handle it. I'm supposed to shoulder all the weight. I'm supposed to do this. I'm supposed to do that. I know that's wrong. You know, nobody is supposed to shoulder everything, but as much as I know it's wrong, sometimes it's hard to step out of that role, you know, to not try to be Superman.
And the conversation I often have with people, especially the students I work with, is the idea that sometimes we talk about talking about mental health as a weakness. And I go, look, the scariest thing I've ever done is stand up in front of a group of 17-year-olds and tell them about the time I thought about taking my own life. It is not weak to talk about your mental health. It's strong. It's brave. There is nothing we can do that takes more courage than to stand up and say, I am struggling. And I think if we can reframe it that way and say it's not a weakness, it's a strength, I think for me, that's part of the solution.
That's why I get asked a lot of the times, because I'm very unapologetic about a lot of the things that I do or say. And a lot of the times people ask me, you know, well, isn't there anything, don't you have regrets? Isn't there anything in your life you would go back and change? And no. My answer is always no. I don't have regrets. I don't want to go back and change anything, because even if you change one thing, no matter how minute or how small it might seem in your past, your entire future could change. And I'm kind of okay with who I am. You know, I'm mostly happy with the person that I grew up to be. And I know that if you change anything, that it all changes. And I know through my jackassery throughout the 40 years that I've been alive, I have touched other people's lives for the better. And my fear is, if I were given the opportunity to go back and change anything, how many people's lives would be ill affected because I tried to make something better for myself in the past. Yeah. And that's a heavy weight to carry. You know, of course, their time machines don't exist, and you can't go back and change anything. But it's trying to look at the positives. Yes, okay, I fell down, but while I was picking myself up, someone else saw it and had the strength to keep themselves from falling down or pick themselves back up later.
And I completely agree. You know, what happened to me in 2017, I wouldn't wish upon anyone. It was horrible. I hated every moment of it, and it was just so unbelievably difficult knowing that I wasn't the Antony that I was. But if that hadn't have happened, we wouldn't be chatting now. I wouldn't be sat in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. I wouldn't have cycled across the country. I wouldn't have met all sorts of wonderful people. And I strongly believe that kind of what happens. And I am the sum of what has happened. If I hadn't had my breakdown in 2017, when I had a minor dose of working from home, 2020 would have hit me like a baseball bat to the face. But when 2020 came, I had learned enough about myself to, you know, since we went home, I was like, hi, manager, Nikki, yeah, I'm struggling. Like, this is going to be difficult. And here are the things I'm going to struggle with. And we kind of came up with a plan for how I could keep going. You know, and sometimes that means, hey, if I'm starting to feel like I'm not doing work and I'm not making progress, I'm going to leave home. I'm going to go and have a little walk. I'm going to come back and I'm going to cook supper and make a real nice meal and do all the washing up. And sure, that means I miss a couple of hours of work, but that's better than taking a week off because I've fallen into a depressive hole.
Yeah, self-care is important, and self-care can look almost like anything, because anything that you enjoy or anything that brings you comfort or peace to do, i.e. cooking or do a bit of washing up, you know, if it brings you peace, then it's self-care.
Yeah, I'm with you.
All right, Anthony. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I do have a question for you. Hey, Anthony.
Okay.
Tell me a story.
Okay. I'd like to tell you a story about what you can discover when you cycle in the rain. So I should preface this by saying I describe myself as not a good cyclist. I don't do much cycling apart from when I do these charity challenges. I've done a few in the past. And after them, I hide my bike at the back of the garage, pretend I can't see it, and don't go for a ride as long as possible. And in particular, I dislike cycling when it's not warm, sunny, and the wind's coming from behind me. It's already difficult enough to jump on a bike and spin your legs. Why would I do it in the cold? Why would I do it in the rain? Why would I do it when I'm going uphill? Why would I do it when the wind's in my face? And the trouble is, when you say you're going to cycle from New York to San Francisco and you've got a timetable of places to get to, you don't really have much choice about that. 3 months in America, it's going to rain sometimes. And I've been lucky. It's not rained that much. But there was a day in Pittsburgh, and I had a lovely stay in Pittsburgh, really interesting city. Went to a pinball cafe. Fantastic. But as I was there, I was watching this weather forecast, and I knew the day I was going to leave Pittsburgh, it was going to start raining at about midnight, and it was going to keep raining all day long. And I thought, well, the only thing for it is to stick on those waterproofs that I've lugged all the way over here. But the thing about waterproofs when you're cycling, is water finds a way in, right? You wear a good pair of waterproofs and you stand still for a while, it will keep the water out. You're moving around, it will come in your neck, it will go up your arms, it will slip under the coat. So I set off at 7 o'clock in the morning, and it's wet and it's raining and I'm cold. And I remember at one point stopping for a little pee break under a bridge and setting off and seeing a puddle and thinking that doesn't look too bad. And the puddle's about a foot deep and I nearly fall off a bicycle. And I watched my rims, my hub disappear under the puddle. I'm like, fucking hell. And I'm cycling along, and I get to the Beaver River, and I'm like, I'm a bit cold. I should get changed. And you know, when you're cycling, you can't just kind of, you know, pop home. Like, home's the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, so I'm standing under like a covered awning for entrance to a restaurant. I'm stripping off basically down to my bib shorts and putting on new dry clothes underneath, and kind of getting cold. And my feet are literally yellow at this point. But the only thing to do when you're cold and wet on a bicycle is get back on and keep cycling, because the longer you're still, the longer you're cold. So I'm heading up Beaver Falls, and I'm going through kind of different towns and thinking I want to stop for lunch. And I've actually I had this wonderful route planned out on old roads, kind of mirroring, I think it's Highway 18 or Highway 19. And I just thought, I don't want to be turning left or right and having to stop. I want to get on the main highway, sit in the hard shoulder, turn all my lights on, and cycle as fast as possible, because the sooner I get to the end of the day, the better. And I reached this town called Koppel. And I stop and think, right, time for food. And I like to stop at at local diners, at local cafes. I think you meet the most interesting people. I think you get the most interesting food. And Koppel has two places for food. It has a gas station with a pizza place attached, and it has a Subway. And I go, I'm not interested in that. I'm going to cycle to the next town. And I pull up my weather forecast and I pull up a radar, and the radar goes, hey, it is about to rain. You think it's wet now? We're about to throw buckets of water in your direction. I think, right, sod that. I'm not going out. I'm going to go and sit in the Subway. I can see the sign over there. I'm going to grab a sandwich. Sure, it'll be rubbish, but, you know, I'm going to grab that Subway. I'm going to sit in the corner and say, can I sit here for a while? And I get in, and the two staff, the two people who run it, absolutely wonderful. They're like, right, you go and grab this as your corner. We'll keep an eye on your bicycle. Do you need to charge anything? Do you need any paper towels to dry yourself off? And I have a bit of a banter with everyone that comes in. And I get my sandwich and my cookie and my drink, and I say, I'm just going to pop to the restroom, as you Americans would say. And as I'm heading to the restroom, I hear them go, hey, here comes our 100-year-old boyfriend. What? Come back from the restroom, and there's a gentleman sat at my table. I very much just believe in having a chat with everyone and kind of being open. So I go, hey, how you doing? Good, he says. We have a bit of a chat, and I say I'm cycling across America, and I notice he's holding this walking stick with some carvings in it. So, oh, what are your carvings? He says, oh, these are my carvings from when I was in the Second World War. And my grandmother passed away in November 2020, and I thought that was the last time I would see someone who was a part of the Second World War. World War II veterans are few and far between these days. People who had to genuinely go out and fight for freedom that directly impacted, you know, me are few and far between. So he tells me about his stick. And at the top, he has the numbers 511. That's the number of days he was in the field. He landed in Sicily. He fought his way up through Italy. He was at Monte Cassino, which is one of the most devastating battlefields of the Second World War. And he fights his way up to Dachau concentration camp. And he says, you know, it was hell on earth. None of us wanted to go there, but someone had to go in and help those people, and we were tasked with that. So he's involved in liberating the people in Dachau concentration camp. And we get speaking. It turns out his name is Guy, which is my dad's name. And all the way through this trip, there have been these little kind of spooky coincidences. Guy is not a particularly common name. And I kind of reflect on this, and I kind of think, if I hadn't been doing this trip, I wouldn't have cycled in the rain. If I'd gone any other day and it had been sunny, I wouldn't have gone to that Subway. I'd have gone to, I'm sure, a very nice diner in the next town or two. But because it rained, it forced me to stop. And I met a World War II veteran and had a chance to share stories. I talked about my journey, and he sponsored me, which was wonderful. And at the end, I went up to the two serving ladies after he'd gone. He said, well, I'd like to, you know, he's made a donation to me. I'd like to pay for his next, he comes in all the time. I'd like to pay for his next sandwich. And they said, well, he doesn't pay. We cover his sandwiches. He's a World War II veteran. Of course we're going to do that. And so I think there's just something around sometimes in life when it's cold and it's wet and we don't want to be there, we might have the opportunity to have an experience we would never have had. And there are lots of times in my life, you know, if I was back home, I wouldn't go cycling in the rain. And I think this is, for me, a story that kind of makes me think about sometimes when things aren't good, when we're not enjoying ourselves, that's when the best things in life can happen. I'm not going to say that I'm going to cycle in the rain every time it rains when I get back to the UK. I'm probably going to avoid it as far as possible and put those waterproofs in the big drawer. But on the days when you have to cycle in the rain, you never know what might happen.
Aside from putting the waterproofs in the drawer, definitely bury that bicycle for a while. So, do you intend to do this again? No, absolutely not. I intend to get home, sit on a big cushion, and hide my bicycle. I didn't mean like right away, but
this grew out for me of a very particular situation. I would like to keep doing a bit of cycling. You know, I am as fit as I've ever been in my life, and I would like to try and keep some of that fitness. I would like to keep doing a few adventures, ideally in slightly better weather and with slightly less mountains. But this kind of very much grew out of that mental health breakdown. So, you know, maybe there'll be other challenges I will face in my life, and I will kind of come up with a realization of things I would like to do. But honestly, you know, I was planning this project for 5 years. It's been 5 years of my life. in 5 years of my wife's life. And I think both of us are going, actually, we kind of want the ability, this is great. I'm glad I've done it. But, it is a month as we speak today that I'm reunited with my wife. I feel like I've done a fair bit of giving, and I'm quite looking forward to going home, washing the dishes, baking a cake, making some food, sitting down in front of Netflix, and putting my feet up for a bit.
I would say you've earned it. Well,
I'm sure there'll be other things. Well, go ahead.
If you do have the insane idea to ride across America again in the future, if you make it to Detroit, my door is open to you. I'd like to actually sit down and hang out with you for a little bit.
Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. And as I've said to everyone on the trip, hey, if you're ever in the UK and you find yourself in Yorkshire, come and say hi. I'd love to show you around my much smaller neck of the woods.
All right, Anthony, you've made it through almost every part of this interview unscathed. It is time for interview roulette. Are you ready?
Okay. Well, as ready as I'll ever be.
Yeah, that's usually the answer. All right, so before we got started on the interview, I had you pick 5 numbers at random, and these are the questions that correspond with those numbers. The first question on the list is, what wastes the most time in your day-to-day life?
TikTok.
Really?
Yeah. I'm a millennial. I remember Facebook being a thing when I started at university, and it started off as something that was a great way of connecting with people. And what I find now on most social media, I go on Facebook, I go on Instagram, I go on Twitter. It's all sorts of people who either believe the same as me. So my Twitter is full of people shouting about bad cycling infrastructure and how people are literally dying on our roads because we're not creating protected spaces. Or it's people saying, hey, look at this wonderful example of cycling infrastructure in the Netherlands. And I sit there going, oh my goodness, I should do something locally about this. Or I go on Facebook and see my friends living a wonderful life or having challenges. And I go, oh my goodness, I should go and speak to them. And what I like about TikTok, I don't post anything. I don't follow anyone I know. It just gives me a series of little mini breaks. And I basically use it as my version of, like, rather than going on Facebook and Twitter, I will go on TikTok for kind of 15 minutes at a time. And when I say 15 minutes, we both know that I mean an hour. And that just gives me a chance to switch off and give my brain a bit of a chance to stop worrying and thinking, I'm sat here with a to-do list down here of about 20 things I need to do. Apparently every hotel in the town I'm staying in 2 nights is fully booked up. So in a minute, I might just go on TikTok, give my brain a chance to cope, and then move on.
Do you find the songs getting stuck in your head?
Yes. I don't know about you. I currently have a song by Boney M in old Chicago town, and a gentleman leading a group of Chinese dancers just everywhere on my For You page. And I don't know, the trouble with TikTok is I'll go and speak to someone else and I go, I've never heard of that. But everywhere I go, it's that same bloke doing that same dance.
My song currently stuck in my head is "My Money Don't Jiggle Jiggle, It Folds." It's just on repeat. It's annoying.
Yeah.
All right. Second question: what thing that you've made are you most proud of?
I'm going to be slightly theoretical in this, and I'm going to say that I've made this bike ride happen. It's not a physical object, but I've planned and I've made this trip happen. And we talked earlier on about how we are constantly living with negative voices, and I've reflected a bit. I was picked on as a kid. I was a bit bullied as a kid. And when I was picked on, I would respond, and that probably made people more likely to pick on me, which doesn't excuse the fact that I was picked on, but it meant I was constantly receiving negative voices. And so even now, it is difficult for me to say I'm proud of what I'm doing. It's difficult for me to say I'm doing a good thing. But it's something I try and do. You can hear the hesitation in my voice here that I'm saying I am proud of the fact that for 5 years I planned a charity bike ride and that I've raised over £20,000 for charity. That's probably the biggest thing I've ever done.
Something to be proud of.
And just need to get to the finish line now.
All right, next question. How would you like to be remembered?
No, the easy answer to this is kind of as someone who had a good sense of humor, as someone who wanted to make the world a better place, as someone who found happiness in their own time, and as someone who made the world a better place. But I think if I was going to be slightly more abstract, I'd like to be remembered by actions. I've had people who've messaged me through this ride and said, I've heard you talking about your mental health story. Our stories are similar. This has inspired me to go off and share. I've had school kids who I visited before I left who found me on Instagram saying, you need to know that everyone in our class is talking about your talk. We didn't ask you any questions at the time because we're school kids. We don't do that. But people are reflecting on it. And I know people who've asked for help because you came and spoke. I know people who've, said to me, hey, I've always wanted to go and do this big adventure. And I go, well, why haven't you? And we've talked about it. And I've seen them kind of go, well, maybe I should just go off and do it. So I hope that my time on this planet leads other people to do good things, and that kind of it becomes one of those good domino effects where I share my story, someone else goes and shares their story, and someone else then goes and shares their story, and somewhere down the line there's someone who's sat there at a point in their life where they're at a crossroads where things go terribly or brilliantly, and that influences them because this is an interconnected planet, and you just never know when someone who I've met is going to be a real significant part of someone else's life. That's how I'd like to be remembered.
I like that. That's a good answer. Not that you were looking for validation for your answer, but Okay, this next one. If you weren't already married, okay? If you could marry any fictional character and have them come to life, who would it be?
Wow. So there's a book series by someone called Becky Chambers. Really fascinating author, very progressive. They write science fiction, but they are a big proponent of diversity and of, when you write science fiction, you don't just have to abide by the rules of this planet as we see them. She's written 4 books in a series called Wayfarer. And they're kind of like, they're interconnected stories. They're not, it's not always the same people. And it's not a story of there are good people and bad people and they fight. It's there are normal people in difficult situations and they respond as best they can. But each and every one of those fiction books has challenged my thinking about how society works in the UK. It's challenged my thinking about how we treat death and dying. It's challenged my thinking about how we treat the notion of raising a family. Why do we trust people who have no experience in raising kids to raise a child by themselves? But it's also kind of challenged my thinking a little bit on the idea of a family unit as we perceive it in the normal Western world, or normal for us. So I don't think I would choose any one of those characters, but I think that is a universe that if I had to go back and start a relationship, I would be interested to go into, because it talks about all these different kind of races different alien races who have different approaches to family units, to relationships. And I was reading that and thinking, well, why do we just choose one person? And I'm very happily married and I have no plans on changing that whatsoever. But I think if I was going right back to square one, I would love to be in that universe and kind of almost have a plethora of choices of how do I wish to live my life and find a life partner.
I like it. All right, one more.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if this is your thing or not, but it's the question you chose, and you have to come up with an answer.
Okay.
What superhero deserves their own video game?
Okay. So I'm not a big fan of Marvel. It's not something that I follow.
There's more than just Marvel when it comes to superheroes.
Yeah. There is a wide range of superheroes. Now I'm trying to. So I do improv comedy back in the UK, back before the pandemic, and people were allowed to, spend time together. And we played a game called World's Worst Superheroes. And in this game, it's kind of as a challenge, and the audience chooses the name of a first superhero, and each successive person comes in and they are given the name of their superhero by the previous person. They don't have to be that person. So you might get, it's Captain Octopus Arms, or it's Mr. Pants on Fire. And it's a ridiculous game. And I love the idea of a video game where you are a constant series of badly named superheroes. You know, it's Mr. Fire Hydrants for Arms. It's Captain Levitating but upside down, and them having to solve a series of clues. So something kind of a little bit humorous, a little bit wacky, a little bit off the beat, and, you know, sort of thing where maybe kind of people can suggest names and the best ones get thrown into the mix. I think that would be a whole lot of fun.
Had a conversation last year sitting around the campfire in my backyard, and someone had asked me if I could have any superpower, what would it be? And the one I came up with sounds like something that might have come up in your improv group. Probably not, though, because they call me odd for a reason. So the superpower that I came up with is, I want the ability, if I could choose my superpower, the superpower I would choose is the ability to shit other people's pants.
Yeah, that would be fascinating in that video game. You know,
well, you just think about the real world applications of it too. Is like, how do you stop a bank robbery? You make the robbers shit their pants. I'm pretty sure that would stop it. You got a politician on TV that you don't like and you're tired of hearing, make him shit his pants on live TV.
Yeah, JFK is about to be assassinated.
Yeah,
gunshot goes wide.
So yeah, I want the superpower to shit other people's pants.
Yeah, I can. I mean, it's a dangerous superpower to have.
With great power comes great responsibility.
But yeah, so that's what I would go for. Something a little bit wacky, a little bit off the wall, cartoon design, a little bit indie. Yeah, let's go there.
Okay, Anthony, I want to thank you for taking the time to sit down and talk with me. I'm amazed at what you're doing. You should feel proud. I understand that it might feel hard to at times, but you really should feel proud of what you're doing.
Well, thank you very much. It's been really great chatting with you and having a chance to kind of reflect on some of what's happened. And I hope when this comes out, if people want to follow the journey, I'll be somewhere in the middle of the Rocky Mountains about to face the deserts of Nevada. So if you want to see what happens to a ginger person in the sun, now's the time to head over to my social media pages.
It's mostly gray now, but I used to look like you. I am very pale, as you can see.
Yeah.
So I used to live in Arizona, and sunscreen and water, bud. Sunscreen and water.
Well, I've just been to REI, which is very exciting, and I brought myself some sun sleeves and a super sexy sun hat to keep the sun off the back of my neck. So if you thought that cycling couldn't get sexier, I'm just about to prove you wrong.